Excuse me. Add that air bubble in there. Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Southern horrors and other writings. Before we jump into the video here, I do want to go ahead and let you know I have two ways to donate to the channel. I have a Patreon account, which is a month-to-month donation system. And then I have a Ko-fi account, which can do the same, but also allows you to donate single one-time payments. Do not donate if you are going to be put in financial jeopardy over such a thing. I'd rather you be able to take care of what you need to take care of first. It's hard enough as it is out there. If you can afford it and you want to donate, thank you. I highly appreciate it. It's just me, myself, and I that do the videos. So, before we get into the reading, as you can see, or not see, I don't know how this will look, but I'm not filming myself because my webcam broke, so it's a slightly different look to the way the videos are going to be produced. But with that said, let's jump back into reading here. Hundreds of policemen were about. Each corner was guarded by a squad commanded either by a sergeant or a corporal, and every man had the word to shoot the Negro as soon as he was sighted. He was a desperate black and would be given no chance to take more life. Legal sanction was given to the mob or any man of the mob to kill Charles at sight by the mayor of New Orleans, who publicly proclaimed a reward of $250, not for the arrest of Charles, not at all, but the reward was offered for Charles' body, dead or alive. The advertisement was as follows: $250 reward. Under the authority vested in me by law, I hereby offer, in the name of the city of New Orleans, $250 reward for the capture and delivery, dead or alive, to the authorities of the city, the body of the Negro murderer, Robert Charles, who on Tuesday morning, July the 24th, shot and killed Police Captain John T. Day and Patrolman Peter J. Lamb and wounded Patrolman August T. Mora. Paul Capdeville, Mayor. This authority given to the sergeant by the sergeant to kill Charles on sight would have been no news to Charles, nor to any colored man in New Orleans who, for any purpose whatever, even to save his own life, raised his hand against a white man. It is eyelash or something there. It is now, even as it was in the days of slavery, an unpardonable sin for a Negro to resist a white man, no matter how unjust or unprovoked the white man's attack may be. Charles knew this, and knowing to be captured meant to be killed, he resolved to sell his life as dearly as possible. The next step in the terrible tragedy occurred between 2:30 and 5 o'clock Tuesday morning, about 4 hours after the affair on Dryad Street. The manhunt, which had been inaugurated soon after Officer Mora had been carried to the station, succeeded in running down Robert Charles, the wounded fugitive and located him at 2023 4th Street. It was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning when a large detail of police surrounded the block with the intent to kill Charles on sight. Captain Day had charge of the squad of police. Charles, the wounded man, was in his house when the police arrived, fully prepared to, as results afterward showed, to die in his own home. Captain Day started for Charles' room. As soon as Charles got sight of him, there was a flash to report, and Day fell dead in his tracks. In another instant, Charles was standing in the door, and seeing Patrolman Peter J. Lamb, he drew his gun, and Lamb fell dead. Two other officers, Sergeant Alcoyne and Sergeant Trenchard, who were in the squad, seeing their comrades Day and Lamb fall dead, concluded to raise the siege, and both disappeared into the adjoining house, where they blew out the lights so that their cowardly carcasses should be safe from Charles' deadly aim. The caliber of their courage is well shown by the fact that they concluded to save themselves from any harm by remaining prisoners in the dark room until daybreak, out of reach of Charles' deadly rifle. Sergeant Alcoyne, who had been so brave a few hours before when seeing two colored men sitting on the steps talking together on Dryad Street and supposing that neither was armed, now showed his true caliber. Now he knew that Charles had a gun and was brave enough to use it, so he hid himself in a room 2 hours while Charles deliberately walked out of his room and into the street after killing both Lamb and Day. It is also shown, as further evidence of the bravery of some of the New Orleans finest, that one of them, seeing Captain Day fall, ran 7 blocks before he stopped, afterwards giving the excuse that he was hunting for a patrol box. After daybreak, the officers felt safe to renew the attack upon Charles, so they broke into his room only to find that, what they probably very well knew, he had gone. It appears that he made his escape by crawling through a hole in the ceiling to a little attic in his house. Here he found that he could not escape except by a window which led into an alley which had no opening on 4th Street. He scaled the fence and was soon out of reach. It was now 5 o'clock Tuesday morning, and a general alarm was given. Sergeant Alcoyne and Corporal Trenchard, having received a new supply of courage by returning daylight, renewed their effort to capture the man that they had allowed to escape in the darkness. Citizens were called upon to participate in the manhunt, and New Orleans was soon the scene of terrible excitement. Officers were present everywhere, and the colored men were arrested on all sides upon the pretext that they were impertinent and game niggers. An instance is mentioned in the Times-Democrat of the 25th and shows the treatment which unoffending colored men received at the hands of some of the officers. This instance shows Corporal Trenchard, who displayed such remarkable bravery on Monday night in dodging Charles' revolver, in his true light. It shows how brave a white man is when he has a gun attacking a Negro who is a helpless prisoner. The account is as follows. The police made some arrests in the neighborhood of the killing of the two officers. Mobs of young darkies gathered everywhere. These Negroes talked and joked about the affair, and many of them were starting a race war on the spot. It was not until several of these little gangs amalgamated and started demonstrations that the police commenced to act. Nearly a dozen arrests were made within an hour, and everybody in the vicinity was in a tremor of excitement. It was about 1 o'clock that the Negroes on 4th Street became very noisy, and George Myers, who lives on 6th Street near Rampart, appeared to be one of the prime movers of this little riot that was rapidly developing. Policemen Exnicios and Sheridan placed him under arrest, and owing to the fact that a police wagon had just left with a number of prisoners, they walked him towards St. Charles Avenue in order to get a conveyance to take him to the 6th Precinct station. A huge crowd of Negroes followed the officers and their prisoners. Between Dryads and Barone on 6th, Corporal Trenchard met the trio. He had his pistol in his hand and came on them running. The Negroes in the wake of the officers and prisoner took the flight immediately. Some disappeared through gates and some over fences and into yards, for Trenchard, visibly excited, was waving his revolver in the air and was threatening to shoot. He joined the officers in their walk toward St. Charles Street, and the way he acted led to the white people who were witnessing the affair to believe that his prisoner was the wanted Negro. At every step, he would punch him or hit him with the barrel of his pistol, and the onlookers cried, "Lynch him! Kill him!" and other expressions until the spectators were thoroughly wrought up. At St. Charles Street, Trenchard desisted, and calling the empty ice wagon, threw the Negro in the body of the vehicle and ordered Officer Exnicios to take him to the 6th Precinct station. The ride to the station was a wild one. Exnicios had all he could do to watch his prisoner. A gang climbed into the wagon and administered a terrible thrashing to the black en route. It took a half hour to reach the police station, for the mule that was drawing the wagon was not overly fast. When the station was reached, a mob of nearly 200 howling white youths was awaiting it. The noise they made was something terrible. Myers was howling for mercy before he reached the ground. The mob dragged him from the wagon and the officer with him. They began a torrent of abuse for the unfortunate prisoner. The station door was but 30 feet away, but it took Exnicios nearly 5 minutes to fight his way through the mob to the door. There was no other officers present, and the station seemed to be deserted. Neither the doorman nor the clerk paid any attention to the noise on the outside. As a result, the maddened crowd wrought their vengeance on the Negro. He was punched, kicked, bruised, and torn. The clothes were ripped from his back, while his face, after that few minutes, was unrecognizable. This was the treatment accorded and permitted to the helpless prisoner because he was black. All day Wednesday, the manhunt continued. The excitement caused by the deaths of Day and Lamb became intense. The officers of the law knew they were trailing a man whose aim was deadly and whose courage they had never seen surpassed. Commenting upon the marksmanship of the man, which the paper styled to a fiend, the Times Democrat of Wednesday said, "One of the extraordinary features of the tragedy was the marksmanship displayed by the Negro desperado. His aim was deadly and his coolness must have been something phenomenal. The two shots that killed Captain Day and Patrolman Lamb struck their victims in the head, a circumstance remarkable enough in itself, considering the suddenness and fury of the onslaught and the darkness that reigned in the alleyway. Later on, Charles fired at Corporal Perrier, who was standing at least 75 yards away. The murderer appeared at the gate, took lightning aim along the side of the house, and sent a bullet whizzing past the officer's ear. It was a close shave, and a few inches deflection would no doubt have added a fourth victim to the list. At the time of the affray, there is good reason to believe that Charles was seriously wounded, and at any event, he had lost quantities of blood. His situation was as critical as it is possible to imagine, yet he shot like an expert in the target range. The circumstance shows the desperate character of the fiend, and his terrible dexterity with weapons makes him one of the most formidable monsters that has ever been loose upon the community. Wednesday, New Orleans was in the hands of a mob. Charles, still sought for and still defending himself, had killed 4 policemen, and everybody knew that he intended to die fighting. Unable to vent its vindictiveness and bloodthirsty vengeance upon Charles, the mob turned its attention to other colored men who happened to get in the path of its fury. Even colored women, as has happened many times before, were assaulted and beaten and killed by the brutal hoodlums who thronged the streets. The reign of absolute lawlessness began about 8 o'clock Wednesday night. The mob gathered near the Lee statue and was soon making its way to a place where the officers had been shot by Charles. Describing the mob, the Times Democrat on Thursday evening says, "The gathering in the square, which numbered about 700, eventually became in a measure quiet, and a large, lean individual in poor attire and with an unshaven face leaped upon a box that had been brought for the purpose, and in a voice that under no circumstances could be heard at a very great distance shouted, 'Gentlemen, I am the mayor of Kenner.' He did not get a chance for some minutes to further declare himself, for the voice of the rabble swung over his like a huge wave over a sinking craft. He stood there, however, wildly waving his arms, and demanded a hearing, which was given him when The uneasiness of the mob was quieted for a moment or so. "I am from Kenner, gentlemen, and I come down to New Orleans tonight to assist you in teaching the blacks a lesson. I have killed a Negro before, and in revenge of the wrong wrought upon you and yours, I am willing to kill again. The only way that you can teach these niggers a lesson and put them in their place is to go out and lynch a few of them as an object lesson. String up a few of them, and the others will trouble you no more. That is the only thing to do. Kill them, string them up, lynch them. I will lead you, and if you will but follow on the parish prison and lynch Pierce." They bore down on the parish prison like an avalanche, but the avalanche split harmlessly on the blank walls of the jail, and Remy Clark sent out a brief message. "You can't have Pierce, and you can't get in." Up to that time, the mob had no opposition, but Clark's answer chilled them considerably. There was no deep-seated desperation in the crowd after all, only that wild lawlessness which leads to deeds of cruelty, but not the stubborn battle. Around the corner from the prison is a row of pawn and second-hand shops, and to these the mob took like the ducks of proverbial mill pond, and devastation they wrought upon Mr. Fink's establishment was beautiful in its line. Everything from a breastpins to horse pistols went into the pockets of the crowd, and in the melee a man was shot down, while just around the corner somebody planted a long knife in the body of a little newsboy who had no reason as yet shown. Every now and then a Negro would be flushed somewhere in the outskirts of the crowd and left beaten to a pulp. Just how many were roughly handled will never be known, but the unlucky 13 had been severely beaten and maltreated up to a late hour, a number of those being in the charity hospital under the bandages and court plaster of the doctors. The first colored man to meet death at the hands of the mob was a passenger on a streetcar. The mob had broken itself into fragments after its disappointment at the jail, each fragment looking for a Negro to kill. The bloodthirsty cruelty of one crowd is thus described by the Times Democrat. "We will get a nigger down here, you bet," was the yelling boast that went up from 1,000 throats, and for the first time the march of the mobs was directed toward the downtown sections. The words of the riders were prophetic, for just as Canal Street was reached a car on the Vier line, there came along. "Stop that car!" cried 100 men. The advance guard, heeding the injunction, rushed up to the slowly moving car, and several seized the trolley, jerked it down. "Here's a Negro," said 6 men, and sprang upon the car. The car was full of passengers at that time, among them several women. When the trolley was pulled down and the car thrown into total darkness, the latter began to scream, and for a moment or so it looked as if the life of every person in the car was in peril, for some of the crowd, with demoniacal yells of "There he goes!" began to fire their weapons indiscriminately. The passengers in the car hastily jumped to the ground and joined the crowd. It was evidently the safest place to be. "Where's that nigger?" was the query passed along the line, and with that search began in earnest. The Negro, after jumping off the car, lost himself for a few moments in the crowd, but after a brief search was again located. The slight delay seemed, if possible, only to get the desire of the bloodthirsty crowd, for the reappearance of the Negro was a signal of the chorus of screams and pistol shots directed at the fugitive. With the speed of a deer, the man ran straight from the corner of Canal and Vierre to Custom House Street. The pursuers, closely following, kept up a running fire. Notwithstanding the fact that they were right at the Negro's heels, their aim was poor and the bullets went wide of the mark. The Negro, on the reaching Custom House Street, darted from the sidewalk into the middle of the street. This was the worst maneuver that he could ever made, as it brought him directly under the light from an arc lamp located in the nearby corner. When the Negro came only in view in the foremost of the closely following mob, they directed a volley at him. Half a dozen pistols flashed simultaneously, and one of the bullets evidently found its mark, for the Negro stopped short, threw up his hands, wavered for a moment, and then started to run again. This stop, slight as it was, proved fatal to the Negro's chances, for he had not gotten 20 steps farther when several of the men in advance of the others reached his side. A burly fellow, grabbing him with one hand, dealt him a terrible blow on the head with the other. The wounded man sank to the ground. The crowd pressed around him and began to beat him and stamp him. The crowd pressed around him and began to beat and stamp him. The men in the rear pressed forward, and those beating the man were shoved forward. The half-dead Negro, when he was freed from his assailants, crawled over to the gutter. The men behind, however, stopped pushing when those in the front yelled, "We got 'em!" And then it was that the attack on the bleeding Negro was resumed. A vicious kick directed at the Negro's head sent him into the gutter, and for a moment the body sank from view beneath the muddy, slimy water. "Pull 'em out! Don't let 'em drown!" was the cry, and instantly several of the men around the half-drowned Negro beat him down and drew the body out. Twisting the body around, they drew the head and shoulders up on the street, while the waist down the Negro's body remained under the water. As soon as the crowd saw that the Negro was still alive, they began to beat and kick him. Every few moments they would stop and, striking matches, look into the man's face to see if he still lived. To better see if he was dead, they would stick lighted matches to his eyes. Finally, believing that he was dead, they left him and started to look for the other Negroes. Just about this time, someone yelled, "He ain't dead!" and the men came back and renewed the attack. While the men were beating and pounding the prostrate form with stones and sticks, a man in the crowd ran up and, crying, "I'll fix this damn Negro," poked the muzzle of a pistol almost against the body and fired. This shot must have ended the man's life, for he lay like a stone and realizing that they were wasting energy in further attacks, the men left their victim lying in the street. The same paper on the same day, July the 26th, describes the brutal butchery of an aged colored man early in the morning. Baptiste Philo, a Negro 75 years of age, was the victim of mob violence at Kerlerek and North Peters Street about 2:30 o'clock this morning. The old man is employed in the French market and was on his way there when he was met by a crowd and desperately shot. The old man found his way to the 3rd Precinct Police Station, where it was found that he had received a ghastly wound to the abdomen. The ambulance was summoned and he was conveyed to the charity hospital. The students pronounced the wound fatal after a superficial examination. The mob rule continued Thursday, its violence increasing every hour until 2 p.m. when the climax seemed to be reached. The fact that colored men and women had been made the victims of brutal mobs, chased through the streets, killed upon the highways, and butchered in their homes did not call the best element in New Orleans to active exertion on behalf of law and order. The killing of a few Negroes more or less by irresponsible mobs does not cut much figure in Louisiana. But when the reign of the mob law exerts a depressing influence from the stock market and the city's securities begin to show unsteady standing in money centers, then the strong arm of the good white people of the South asserts itself and order is quickly brought out of chaos. It was so with New Orleans on that Thursday. The better element of the white citizens began to realize that New Orleans in the hands of a mob would not prove a promising investment for Eastern capital, so the better element began to stir itself not for the purpose of punishing the brutality against the Negroes who had been beaten, or bringing to justice the murderers of those who had been killed, but for the purpose of saving the city's credit. The Times Democrat, upon this phase of the situation on Friday morning, says, when it became known later in the day that the state bonds had depreciated from a point to a point and a half on the New York market, a new phase of seriousness was manifest to the business community. Thinking men realized that a continuance of unchecked disorder could strike a body blow to the credit of the city and in all probability would complicate the negotiation of the forthcoming improvement bonds. The bare thought that such a disaster might be brought about by a few irresponsible boys, tramps, and ruffians inflamed popular indignation to fever pitch. It was all that was needed to bring to the aid of the authorities the active personal cooperation of the entire better element. With the financial credit of the city at stake, the good citizens rushed to the rescue, and soon the mayor was able to mobilize a posse of 1,000 willing men to assist the police in maintaining order, but rioting still continued in different sections of the city. Colored men and women were beaten, chased, and shot whenever they made their appearance upon the street. Late in the night, a most despicable piece of villainy occurred on Rousseau Street, where an aged colored woman was killed by the mob. The Times Democrat thus describes the murder. Hannah Mabry, an old negress, was shot and desperately wounded by shortly after midnight this morning while sleeping in her home at 1929 Rousseau Street. It was the work of a mob and was evidently well planned so far as escape was concerned, for the place was reached by police officers and a squad of volunteer police within a very short time after the reports of the shots, but not a prisoner was secured. The square was surrounded, but the mob had scattered in several directions, and the darkness of the neighborhood aiding them, not one was taken. At the time the mob made the attack on the little house, where it was also in it David Mabry, the 62-year-old husband of the wounded woman, her son Harry Mabry, his wife Fanny, and an infant child. The young couple and their babe could not be found after the whole affair was over, and they either escaped or were hustled off by the mob. A careful search of the whole neighborhood was made, but no trace of them could be found. The little place occupied by the Mabry family is an old cottage on the swamp side of Rousseau Street. It is furnished with slat shutters and with doors and windows. The shutters had been pulled off by the mob and the volleys fired through the glass doors. The younger Mabrys, father, mother, and child, were asleep in the first room at the time. Hannah Mabry and her old husband were sleeping in the next room. The old couple occupied the same bed, and it is miraculous that the old man did not share the fate of his spouse. Officer Bitterwolf, who was one of the first on the scene, said that he was about a block and a half away with officers Fordyce and Sweeney. There were about 20 shots fired, and the trio raced to the cottage. There were 20 or 30 men running down Rousseau Street. Chase was given and the crowd turned toward the river and scattered into several vacant lots in the neighborhood. The volunteer police stationed at the 6th precinct had about 5 blocks to run before they arrived. They also moved on the reports of the firing, and in a remarkably short time, the square was surrounded, but no one could be taken. As they ran to the scene, they were assailed on every hand with the vile epithets and accusation of nigger lovers. Rousseau Street, where the cottage is situated, in the particular dark spot, and no doubt the members of the mob were well acquainted with the neighborhood, for the officers said that they seemed to sink into the earth so completely and quickly that they disappear after they had completed their work, which was complete with the firing of the volley. Hannah Mabry was taken to the charity hospital in the ambulance, where it was found on examination that she had been shot through the right lung and that the wound was particularly serious. Her old husband was found in the little wrecked home, well nigh distracted with fear and grief. It was he who informed the police that at the time of the assault, the younger Mabrys occupied the front room. As he ran about the little home, as well as the feeble condition would permit, he severely lacerated his feet on the glass broken from the window and door. He was escorted to the 6th Precinct station where he was properly cared for. He could not realize why his little family had been so murderously attacked, and was inconsolable when his wife was driven off in the ambulance, piteously moaning in her pain. The search for the perpetrators in the outrage was thorough, but both police and armed force of citizens had only their own efforts to rely on. The residents of the neighborhood were aroused by the firing, but they would give no help in the search and did not appear in the least concerned over the affair. Groups were on almost every doorstep, and some of them even jeered in a quiet way at the men who were voluntarily attempting to capture the members of the mob. Absolutely no information could be had from any of them, and the whole affair had the appearance of being the work of roughs who either lived in the vicinity or their friends. So yeah, that's the actual piece. Let's jump back here and read some of the footnotes, because I forgot footnotes last episode, and there was a footnote this episode as well. So just bear with me a moment. Last episode there was a mention let's see. There was a mention about mob violence, and in the footnote it says 11 Italians were lynched after being charged with the murder of the New Orleans chief of police. The Italian government protested, and the United States government eventually paid $25,000 in indemnities to the King of Italy. And I think there was one more footnote, which was in this particular episode. When they talked about Remy Clark, who told them you cannot get in, you could not have Pierce. It says he was presumably the warden. But yeah. Now, with that read, let me go ahead and say this. I take no pleasure in saying those vile particular words. I tend to say Negroes a little more loosely because it's often still used, perhaps unfairly, but used in so-called civilized talk. Even up until Martin Luther King Jr.'s time, they even called themselves Negroes. Not merely African Americans, but they were usually listed Negroes or black. But what I am referring to is the despicable slur that ends in a hard R. I think there were 6 uses of that word in that particular episode we read. And you notice the mob, how violent they were, and they still didn't get Charles. It was just, we want vengeance, and we're just going to kill whoever we can grab. We're going to beat whoever we can grab. We're going to violate whoever we can grab. I guarantee you, today these would be the same people crying, but law and order. They don't care about that kind of shit. They're just about vengeance. They want to see others suffer. And that's what we have here. You know, sometimes it's still a bit shocking, even though you know what went on. How things were. It's still sometimes reading it, it kind of shocks the system a little. I guess because it's so far into the past. You think racism would be over, but no, Trump and his dumbass sycophants have proved, no, it's not. Because they decide, yeah, let's get rid of the Voting Rights Act, which actually did what it was supposed to do and help create an equality in the way people are represented in government. But, of course, your racist Republicans don't want that. They're racist shits. And they know that other races are far and likely more going to vote Democrat than for a Republican. So, yeah. You kind of figure we should be over this, but no. They prove over and over we're not. And that's why these kind of readings, this kind of stuff is necessary. Absolutely fucking necessary. When you have fucking goddamn Tennessee banning Alex Haley's book, Roots. Yeah. When the Voting Rights Act gets torn apart by the racist Republican Supreme Court. Yeah. We aren't in a post-racism world at all. This was a naked, vile power grab. And you can see how it ties in to this. This is why this type of reading material is still abso-fucking-lutely necessary. But yeah. Again, I apologize for the usage of certain slurs. But I try to keep things as close to the original as they are. Because, like I've said before, I have a gut feeling we're going to need to understand just how vile this is. And a certain party is proving me right. But, we'll go ahead and end this immense episode here. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources, and it can't be a bunch of tinfoil hat wearing sources or anecdotes slapped together to try to make sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.